What if I told you, as a sports scientist, that data and numbers mean nothing by themselves? Data numbers are only 1/3 of this sports science process of data, discussions, decisions. Data numbers are only as important and meaningful as the meaning you give them and how you communicate this data and numbers that set up the consequent 2/3 of this process of the discussion and the decisions. My name is Matt Telmetz, and I'm the Sports Science Coordinator and Sports Performance Specialist at TC Boost Sports Performance, and I have accepted research in sports science at the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research from my time as a graduate assistant at TCU. And I'm here to take you through my 5-minute sports science all about data communication. The what of this video is very simple. Data numbers are very objective. 10 is 10, watts measure power, we know how watts are calculated, and so on, which is why it's so easy to wrap your head around numbers and data, which is consequently why it is so important to get the meaning, the interpretation, and the communication of this data and numbers correct, or else the numbers are going to work against you, not for you. Thus, as a practitioner, first you need to know the context of the data, what is being collected, what it means, why it's being collected, how you intend this data to influence this discussion decision process, and so on. And second, how you are going to communicate and describe this data with everyone involved, from your colleagues to the sport coaches to the athletes and so on. So it's your job not only to create this frame and lens in which everyone else involved looks at this data and numbers, but also reframing when necessary, being conscious of how they're talking about it, how they're describing it, and being able to redirect them when necessary. Here are 3 examples, including PR-itis, demonstrating that communicating the numbers and the interpretations of the numbers are more important than the numbers themselves. At the foundation of all of this misinterpretation and miscommunication of data is PR-itis. And this is a term that my colleagues and I coined, and it simply just means that if an athlete runs a rep or does anything in training that isn't their personal best, their PR, then it's perceived as a wasted, a bad training rep, and that is just not the case. We know that PRs are not going to happen every day, and this process of progress is not always linear. How we fix this, address this, and more effectively communicate this data is in terms of percentages. And the main number we use is 95% of our best as a cutoff between that was a fast, effective training rep that's going to add up over time, or under 95 is something wasn't right, your body might not be feeling the best, let's reevaluate. Discussions and decisions. We found a lot of success with this in our athletes because they truly understand how to interpret this data in real time and what it looks like for our timed sprints and jumps in this entire training process. The second example is this idea of slower versus slow. So an athlete will do a sprint and they'll ask me, was that faster or slower? And I'll say, that was slower. And they'll get super discouraged and frustrated, and slower can mean even 1,000th of a second. So slower means that it wasn't as fast as the previous rep. We give athletes 2.5% for one workout itself from their fastest to their slowest rep to be within an acceptable range. Now slow would be outside of 2.5% and under 95% of their PR. So another example of creating relativity, communicating this data with our athletes on what these sprints should look like for being a good rep relative to what they've done that day, slower versus slow. The last example is a training load example. So what if I told you a training session was 800 units? Does that sound big, small? Big because it's close to 1,000, and 1,000's a big number. So there's so much context, and I'll give you all the context. SRPE load, so the athlete's SRPE, 1 out of 10 multiplied by the duration in minutes. So what if I told you that the athlete's SRPE load for that session was 800 units? It is T-2, so 2 days until game day. What if I told you that this was the second best player on the team? And what if I told you that the plan for that practice was only 525 units? See how there's so much context and numbers needed to truly understand what one number itself means. So knowing everything that goes into a number plus the context, the plan, you have all of these variables in your back pocket to help justify, drive, guide discussion, and consequent decisions relative to just that one number. Thus, moving forward as a practitioner, you can ask yourself, how might these numbers be misinterpreted, or how can I fix a misinterpretation of these numbers? Or you can just go right to the source and ask your colleagues, sport coaches, athletes, how do you evaluate a good training session? Or what do you think of this number? Or what is the plan of what you think should happen today? Those are all talking points, not including the numbers of themselves, to help you go down this process of data, discussion, decision. The numbers mean nothing by themselves and can actually work against you if you don't communicate them properly and effectively. So take a step back, look at all of the data from a 10,000-foot view looking downwards, and ask, what am I really trying to get out of these numbers, and how can I most effectively communicate them?